Hello everyone, it's Mishi at Fun Story Factory, and I've got a new book called A Feast for Pleasant Beasts, and it says, on the 7th of the 7th in the deep, deep forest, the ground begins to shake, for the kindly beasts have arrived at last, and they'll eat till their bellies ache. Are you ready for some of these lovely stories about beasts? Okay, let's begin. A cook in a cave. Cuthbert Wormhill was a boy who lived in a cave on an island, but he was very rarely alone. There were spiders, there were bats, even a grizzly bear, and each he called a friend. The spiders knitted webs, the bear rolled in honey, and the bats snored upside down. But Cuthbert spent his time baking treats. Monday mornings were perfect for making brownies. Tuesdays were reserved for tiny pavlovas, huge pavlovas, and a couple of cherry tarts. Wednesday, as I'm sure you're aware, is the day of the blueberry muffin. On Thursdays, he was busy building towers of chocolate and dozens of rocky roads. Friday, his favourite day, meant plenty of Vicky's sponge, and weekends, of course, were devoted to whipping up scones. Every year, Cuthbert arranged a fabulous picnic. Come rain or shine or snowy blizzard, it took place on the 7th day of the 7th month, a feast for all manner of beasts, but only those with impeccable manners were sent an invite. The angler with a bulbous nose. A picnic is not complete without a troll. Therefore, Ingrid was often first to get an invite. Still, she had to remember to put on a splodge of sun cream, or there was a chance she'd turn to stone. She wore a baggy dress, a floppy hat, and rather large sunglasses too, as becoming a statue right before lunch would certainly spoil the day. Ingrid had a number of lovely homes. There were 2 in leafy Surrey, a small one in Sweden, the big one in Norway, and each was under a bridge. They were dark and dingy, true, but she still found space for her hammock and teeny telly. So, do be on the lookout next time you take a stroll. She's often to be found down by the riverside, catching fish to share with her chums. Cuthbert always gobbles the pufferfish pizza, but there's banana and piranha pie if that's more to your liking. And there's no beast in the land that doesn't love her Hog's Mill Fizz. It's the greatest lemonade in the world and guzzled every year at the gathering. He smelt like rotten spinach. Next to get an invite was Cuthbert's dearest chum, Balthazar, the Bog Monster. There are very few picnics, parties, or festivals where a bog monster shows their face, as a horrible stink is often frowned upon, and not many people ever hope to even meet one because they bathe in mud and forget to brush their teeth. In spite of that, he was always invited and present at the Feast for Pleasant Beasts. This is because he was kind, generous, and marvellous at sparking laughter. He certainly whiffed of rotten eggs, and he appeared well and truly mouldy, but he was delightful company, and Cuthbert would have been glum without him. Balthazar also made scrummy sandwiches. The worm and mustard ones were popular, as were the flies and marmalade, and there was always a race for the sludge and pickle. And if you're ever near Cardiff, do stop at his cottage for tea. He loves having guests. The more the merrier, but don't forget, pegs for your nostrils. An unfortunate giant. Jim loved nothing more than giggles and filling his belly. which did take a while to fill. But he was much too gigantic and had to say no this year. He'd have squidged too many people and things throughout the journey, and there wasn't quite space in the picnic area to fit his enormous bottom. However, it wasn't all doom and gloom, as they'd still see the giant on his birthday. There'd be brightly coloured air balloons floating across the skies. Meals would be served in paper plates as big as flying saucers. Oohs and ahs when his cake arrived in a wheelbarrow, as it was always so pink, always so grand. Then he'd blow out the candles, each one taller than man, with just a huff and a mild puff. There was also New Year's Eve. The beasts loved to sit on the hills outside Edinburgh and watch all the fireworks pop. Jim would bring stew and drinks and lots of fried chocolate. And if they're lucky, he'd bring bagpipes too. Then they'd dance and sing and play foolish games until it was time for the first breakfast of January. Maybe one year the picnic would move further north, so he could stroll down the mountain to join them for food and fun, as nothing beats spending the 7th of the 7th with treasured friends. An eye for finer things. It's important you invited a photographer, and who better than Mademoiselle Cyclops? Maybe you spotted her on Oxford Street, marching past the tourists with her head held high and bags stuffed with fancy new clothes. She stood a smidgen taller than a large giraffe in heels, was always wrapped in blood-red dresses, and never left home without a feathery hat. She was most certainly hard to miss. Or maybe you caught her blabbering. She chatted so loudly that she could be heard from the birthplace in Paris. Or maybe you caught her blabbering. She chatted so loudly that she could be heard from her birthplace in Paris. Even her whispers were closer to roars, and if she ever chose to shout, then folks prepared for a mild earthquake. Perhaps you adored Beasties Weekly, her fabulous magazine. It was packed with photos of famous creatures such as Marilyn Mermaid, Zack the Centaur, and the Griffin of Hollywood Hills. But she never turned down the picnic, and she was always a welcome guest. And the Snapper XZ3000, her camera and pride and joy, captured the moments and memories perfectly. The Devil Wears Tweed. Nelson, the cunning devil, was a busy little fellow, and his diary was extremely full. On the 5th of the 5th he played tennis with lords and ladies. On the 6th of the 6th he'd visit a king for tea. And the 7th of the 7th was his favourite day, because life's greatest joy is a picnic. Now he certainly had marvellous manners. His elbows never touched the dining table, and he never forgot please or thank you. Nobody could deny he was a fantastic magician, for his illusions boggled the mind. But he also had a history of cheating and pinching off people's plates, so you were careful if he joined you for lunch. Therefore, Cuthbert sent an invite, but it came with a final warning. Any stealing, greediness, or eating with your mouth wide open, and you won't be welcome again. The devil was determined to change his wicked ways. He was extremely rich and lived in a castle fit for a fairy tale. But that's not as important as friends. So he rustled up some pies in his massive old oven that he could share with all the beasts. One full of meat, one full of greens, and one full of wiggly maggots. Lucky he had plenty of help from 3 ghosts that haunted his castle, as each was a chef in their previous life. As I was going to St. Ives. His admirers called him Cornwall, but it was the Yeti of St. Ives you found on his birth certificate, a mountain of fur blessed with the voice of an angel. Pigeons huddled on branches just to listen while he sung in the bathtub. It is no wonder he became a star. The Mousehole Talent Contest is where it all began. He beat Terry the tap-dancing Bigfoot and was worthy of the crown. Then he toured taverns with high ceilings and cruise ships sailing the 7 seas, pausing only for fun at the picnic. Cuthbert would always invite him, for he loved his charm and ditties. Surely you're familiar with Gnome, Sweet Gnome? It's always played on the radio. Or what about When Bogeymen Cry? He sung it at every feast. And listen, if you can, to his finest hit, The Unicorn's on Her Mind, but it's likely to cause lots of sobbing. Though there was more to this Yeti than simply rock and roll, he was extremely cuddly and warmer than a dozen hot water bottles, which made him popular with the beasts at bedtime. He also made respectable pasties, each one crammed with veg, bugs and beef, so he could sing, he could feed, he could comfort. Surely Cornwall was the perfect guest. Better than one. The 7th day of the 7th month eventually arrived. Cuthbert woke earlier than the bakers and postman, as he was far too excited to sleep. He filled a wicker basket with treats for the picnic, and then he bid farewell to his cave. But dragging all those goodies made him awfully slow, and he wasn't in time for the ferry. Then out of nowhere, would you believe it, the Sisters Delgado tapped him upon the shoulder. They were two smiley faces sharing a body and 4 gangly arms. The first head was Sophia, and she was wise. The second head was Valeria, and she was brave. So they were rather a splendid team. "We have a rowing boat," said Sophia and Valeria, "and we'd be happy to take you across." They hopped aboard the Dinky Squid, a rowing boat parked on the beach, and the sisters steered it across the waves. But what of the giant jellyfish? What of the hungry sharks? Well, they were so scared of the sisters that they hid in the murky depths. "You're welcome to come to my picnic," said Cuthbert, the second they reached dry land. They clapped 4 hands with giggly glee and offered him their favourite rug. It had been knitted by their 20 fingers using wool from Peruvian sheep, and was perfect for beasts to lay on while they munched and crunched and chewed. The incredible helpful sausage. Oh crumbs! Now Cuthbert and the sisters needed to catch a steam train, but they only had enough pennies for a single ticket. The boy and the beast were stuck at the station and facing a sticky pickle. Perhaps they would miss the picnic. Then Cuthbert felt a tug on his arm. The Hound of Pennsylvania was standing behind him, grinning. He was a pleasant Dachshund, as long as a limousine, as high as a farmer's gate, and the owner of Walker's Bakery. "I have plenty of money," she said, "and I'd be happy to pay for your tickets." They paid for their journey, squeezed into a carriage, and enjoyed a merry old time on the choo-choo. And when Cuthbert invited the Hound to join the party, she jumped for joy, wagged her tail and shouted, "Yes, yes, yes!" Chocolate made her sick, cheese made her dizzy, but she had other tasty snacks to offer. Her colourful handbag was full to the zip with Scotch eggs and chunky sausages, not to mention her award-winning breadsticks. But most importantly, she brought warmth and thrilling tales, and that's the recipe for someone quite marvellous. Warm greetings and cold lemonade. There was a deep, deep forest, not that far from London, where the trees were so old they appeared to have grumpy faces. Children were warned of the witches that lived there, of the ogres that hid in the shadows, but you'd mainly meet toads and badgers. And if you took its mossy path, you'd reach the heart and a perfect match. And a perfect patch of grass for a picnic. The clock struck 12 and the church bells rang for noon, as the beasts all arrived and shook claws, except for Mademoiselle Cyclops, as she was always late. Each was given a goblet of Hogsmill fizz, while Cuthbert filled a large bowl with nibbles. They formed a circle with drinks held high, introduced themselves one by one, then cheered to a joyous day. Though, as you well know, no picnic begins till you've finished a grape-eating contest. So every beast present was handed a vine and wished the best of luck. But Cornwall wasn't to win this year despite his big old jaws, for the sisters pinched his crown. And truth be told, they win every time, except the day they faced a 3-headed hippo. Rise of the Minotaur. Now what better way to start the day than flying the golden eagle? It soared through the sky, glistening in the sunlight as it rode the puffs of breeze. It was truly a magnificent kite. Cuthbert held it tightly and charged down the hill, while Sophia and Valeria rolled on the grass in fits of laughter. Ingrid twirled it around and spun herself dizzy, while the hound whistled and wished to fly. But Nelson, the clumsy devil, got it stuck in a towering oak tree. If only Giant Jim were there, but sadly he was home in humongous slippers, sipping from a huge cup of tea. Then a young Minotaur leapt from prickly bushes. He lived in a maze to the east of the forest, but he'd heard all the screaming and shouting. "Fear not," he yelled, and he climbed to the top like he'd done so often before. After a moment, the golden eagle was saved, and it continued to whiz through the air. "Join our picnic," said the thankful beasts, and the Minotaur smiled with glee, for he'd never met creatures to play with. He opened a sack full of pitta and dips, for he was more than happy to share, and everyone yelled, "That'll do nicely." Eggs and spoon. There were beasts in the past who only went for the egg and spoon race, such as Henrietta Serpent, who practiced all year in her garden and daydreamt of shiny trophies, or the Loch Ness Monster, quick as a startled hare, who won 3 times in a row, and not forgetting the cunning devil Nelson, who was caught trying to cheat with glue. Rules were strict but simple: ostrich eggs, not chicken eggs, and only big wooden spoons. First past the plum tree won, but prod the egg, drop the egg, or dare to scramble the egg, and you'd sadly you'd be disqualified. The hound was happy to judge. Racing wasn't her strength in truth, as it took so long for her body to pass the finish line. So she whistled like the wind, and away they went, wobbling down the hill with their eggs. Whoops! 3 of them slipped and took a bumpy tumble. 1 shuffled in the wrong direction. Then 2 tripped up on their laces, and another blushed as they trapped their foot in a rabbit hole. It was thrilling and mighty close. Excited squirrels on deck chairs were chewing both fingernails, popcorn and toenails. And would you believe it? Surprise, surprise, Ingrid came first by a nose. The dance for all seasons. Suddenly the weather took a turn for the worst. Puffy grey clouds started leaking drops of rain. Unwelcome howling winds rattled the daisies and buttercups. It got so chilly that badgers were putting on duffel coats. Surely the picnic was doomed. Cuthbert moved cakes to his basket, while the hounds stopped the sisters' rug from getting damp, and everyone else tried their absolute best to protect the mountain of sandwiches. But they needn't have worried or dashed, for a passing sphinx had come to the rescue, and her name was Cleopatra. Once upon a time she was a pet for a mighty queen that bathed in milk. Now she ran a hotel in Cairo for mermaids, mutants and monsters. But for the whole of the 7th month she was taking a holiday in England, and she'd been walking through the forest in search of a spot for lunch when she came across the pleasant beasts. She shuffled to the left, wiggled to the right, she hummed, danced and stomped her paws till the sun popped back and the air was warm as a blanket. What a wonderful talent, what a wonderful lioness lady. So they insisted she join the feast. "I have cutlery fit for a pharaoh," she said. Let us use it for this magnificent meal." And Balthazar the Bog Monster beamed and poured her a drink. A hoard and a smorgasbord. Finally, it was time to eat. Hooray! Everyone licked their lips, everyone tucked in their blue serviettes. Then they formed an orderly queue, and one at a time they stacked their fancy plates with scrumptious food. Cornwall's belly was rumbling the loudest, so he was allowed to go first. He took plenty of sausage rolls, a helping of cockroach quiche, and some pita bread dunked in slime. Mademoiselle Cyclops, she also had a noisy tummy, but she was keen to take photos, so she hurriedly slurped all the frog spawn soup. Cuthbert chose the salmon despite it being purple and blue, and he surrounded it with chips drowned in vinegar. However, he was only delighted once he'd added a dollop of ketchup. Balthazar just wanted sandwiches, though only the ones filled with gravel and marmalade. The hound took a slice of ham and chunks of the devil's pie. Sophia and Valeria joined the troll for onion bhajis, and Nelson, being Nelson, took enough to feed a village, so it was unlikely he'd manage dessert. And the Kraken from Ipanema rang out on a portable radio, the soothing sound of jazz, so they tapped their feet beneath the clear blue sky and thanked their lucky stars for a beautiful day. Cakes and Abracadabra. "Who's for Eton mess?" asked Cuthbert, already quite sure of the answer. Every single beast in the deep, deep forest quickly raised their hand. Claw or paw, for who can resist such a wonderful mix of strawberries, cream and meringue? Of course, that was only the start. Next came the cheesecakes, cupcakes and jars of lemon jelly. Then it was the shortbread, the cookies, the box of Bakewell tarts, followed by a fistful of white chocolate fingers. Last but not least, the boys' speciality, the wondrous wormhole layer cake, a tower block of vanilla decorated with blackberries, blueberries and jam. Chins were sticky, lips were caked in sugar, there was plenty of burping and rumbling, but this motley mob did a splendid job of gobbling the puddings. Then they lay on the rug while their bellies settled and the devil entertained them with tricks. First, good gosh, he plucked a dozen doves from a top hat. Then, much to their surprise, he floated above the grass. Then there was a big puff of smoke and he vanished, but before they could panic, he waved from behind the plum tree and they laughed through their round of applause. Some supper for jolly swans. The Wagga Wagga elves are very well known for their talents in the art of cleaning. Their mop skills alone would put many a housemaid to shame. They can use 2 feather dusters at once, occasionally 3, and there's even some who breathe out lavender air freshener. However, none of them had come to the picnic. None of them were even nearby, so it was down to the beast to clear all the scraps and heaps of crumbs, and that might explain why the Cyclops huffed and rolled her eye. "Don't worry," said Cuthbert, pulling up his sleeves, dusting all the cake off his face. "Just chuck all the waste in a sack and follow me." Cuthbert led the beast to a pond beyond the trees, where there lived a herd of swans. They had feathers whiter than snow and necks as long as chair legs. Some were young, some were old, some were timid and some were brash, but they all spent the daytime paddling back and forth, only stopping for bites to eat. The beast threw bread, the beast tossed cake, they scattered the banks with pie, and the swans whispered, they splashed and mumbled, then they rushed to gnaw on the gifts. Old ones and young ones, they all had their fair share. Then they tooted a tune with bugles and trumpets to show they were ever so grateful. Enter the dragon. Everyone who's anyone knows you always follow picnics with campfires. And the beasts absolutely agreed. They found logs for seats, branches to burn, and sticks to poke through their marshmallows. But how would they light the fire? Not one of the beasts had come with a box of matches, so they faced a spot of bother. For twiddling thumbs in the gloomy dark is a dull way to end the day. So they tried rubbing sticks. The Minotaur clashed plenty of stones. Cleopatra tried dancing for lightning, but there wasn't as much as a spark. Then Cuthbert stepped forward. "I may have the answer," he said, and he removed all his clothes except for his spotty underpants. "Golly," barked the hound, "the boy's gone completely mad." Cuthbert just smiled and cleared his throat. Then he closed his eyes and whispered 9 secret words. Afterwards he started to grow. His skin turned scaly, all of it seaweed green. His teeth became fangs, and a tail popped out and wings that flapped and fluttered. The young cook from the cave had become a magnificent dragon. He puffed out his chest, he took a deep breath, he blew flames on the bundles of wood, and so the fire was lit. 3 cheers for Cuthbert, they roared, impressive as both beast and boy, and a magical master of picnics. All together now. The band of jolly beasts sipped from cups of cocoa as the flickering flames warmed their hairy toes. Gasps rang out as the hound shared tales of ghosts, and ribs were tickled by Balthazar's silliest jokes. In fact, they laughed so hard and slapped their knees so loudly that all the badgers and toads were kept from sleeping. Cleopatra then rose from another jig. She wiggled to the left, she shuffled to the right, she waved her arms and the flames rose 10 feet high, roaring and crackling as she danced from side to side, till the sky turned a dark shade of red. The dazzled crowd whistled like wild wolves and begged her to do it again. And what of the Yeti? Would the evening pass without a song or two? Don't be silly. Cornwall nodded his head and strummed his trusty guitar, then launched into a few catchy ballads. My Phoenix from Phoenix, surely you've listened to this one, a favourite of the Minotaur who bobbed his head throughout, or the timeless classic Unchained Fawns, adored by the sisters and Ingrid, who swayed to every word. And last but not least, at the request of all the beasts present, was the long and winding basilisk. Even the badgers and toads liked this one. The squirrels enjoyed it from their deck chairs, and everyone sung till their throats needed honey. Sweet dreams. All good things must come to an end, and that includes glorious feasts. The fire turned to ash, the sun waved goodbye, and the owls began their hooting. The yawning beasts all put on their Jim Jams and slipped into the world's biggest sleeping bag, a gift from Giant Jim. They whispered and giggled at first, and they stared at the skies in hope of shooting stars or low-flying aeroplanes. Young Cuthbert, a boy once more, lay his head to rest on the warm, furry Yeti. Then one by one they bid the others good night. They rubbed their full bellies and closed their tired eyes. They slept soundly under the watchful eye of a moonlit sky, and the deep, deep forest fell silent as they dreamt of Scotch eggs and cakes galore. And they dreamt of doing it all again next year with pleasant friends, both old and new. The end.